Today we're going to be looking at the 2020 presidential elections, not according to me, and not according to the Democrats or the Republicans, but according to the statistics, in this case the polls. So we're going to look at the polls in all these swing states, whether you guys think it's very, very far from going to the other party, or it's going to be the most contested race. We're going to go through all the polls in these swing states, and discuss what the polls show, and characterize those states by what their polling averages show. So for this video, I'm going to be using Real Clear Politics. I wanted to use 538, but they didn't have as many polls listed, so I'm going to use Real Clear Politics for this video. So let's get started by looking at our first state on the list, which is the state of New Mexico. So with the state of New Mexico to June 13th, the poll before that was an MSR poll by around 8%. So I think this is enough data to show us that the state of New Mexico should be in the likely margin. Could it be safe? Maybe, but it's not looking. They put it in a safe margin, so I'm just going to do what the polls say right now. And I mean, it's no doubt that the Democrats are leading by a substantial margin in the state of New Mexico, so that really makes a lot of sense. So we're gonna go on to our next state, which is the state of Colorado. So this state, we don't have any recent polling. Last polls taken were actually from last year when they were polling Biden versus Trump, Bernie Sanders versus Trump, all the different pollings that they were polling. So the last polling was on August 16th, 2019 to August 19th, 2019. And Joe Biden actually led by 10% in that poll. Since this poll is somewhat dated and doesn't take in COVID-19, it doesn't take the Black Lives Matter protest, all these different things, this poll might not be the most accurate of polls. However, I'm going to have to agree with it that it's probably going to fall in the likely margin. Just because 10% is somewhat in the middle of the likely margin, I could say even if COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter have had an effect on the state of Colorado politically, it's going to shift somewhat to the left, whether it be 2 to 3 points. So since average in the middle of the likely column, I would say that it's pretty safe to say it's probably going to go to the likely column if a poll were to be taken recently. So that is the state of Colorado. We're going to move on to our next state, which is the state of Texas. So this state has been somewhat controversial with polling. A lot of people believe them to the T. A lot of people say, no, this is probably not true. And here's the thing with Texas. It's a state that consistently has been going Republican for a long time. Donald Trump went there by 9%. Romney by 15.8. So we saw a very big decrease for the president compared to what Mitt Romney was able to accomplish in 2012. So, I mean, recent polls have Biden ahead by 1, Trump ahead by 1, Trump ahead by 2, Biden ahead by 5, and Trump ahead by 4. So, one consistent trend we're seeing is a lot more polls in favor of Trump compared to Biden. And the polling averages shows that with a plus 0.2 lead for the president. So, people have a lot of hope for the state of Texas going to the Democratic Party. However, although polls may be leading, remember, all these polls, especially when they're in the tilt margin, are in the margin of error. And even if they're further into the margin of error, things can change. Remember 2016 where people were saying, oh, Hillary Clinton's going to win by a lot because of the polls? Things definitely change because the margin of error is something that has to be taken into account. However, since Donald Trump is slightly leading, I'm going to give him that state, so the state of Texas, and its 38 electoral votes. Our next state will be the state of Georgia. So this is a southern state that has started to, trend a lot more Democratic actually. So Romney only won there by 7.8, then Trump carried it by 5 points. We're seeing a slow decrease. So with a lot of these states that are trending a lot more Democratic, the trend has been outpacing what it was before. So we saw here in 4 years, it probably went down 2%. We saw this margin go up down a little, another 2% by the time the midterms came with Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams race. And now I think that this race might even go down to the 1 point margin, 2 point margin. So latest polls have actually the most recent poll by CBS News and YouGov has Biden ahead by 1%. Then the last couple polls have Biden ahead by Trump ahead by 1. A Telegraph Group poll, which is a Republican poll, Trump ahead by 7. And a Gravis poll, Trump ahead by 3, and a Biden poll, a plus 2. So, right now, this shows us a couple things. First, polling is not very consistent here, so that shows that the state is a little unstable when it comes, you're either kind of solidly for one party or the other. And we can tell through this that Donald Trump is in the lead narrowly, at least, in these states. It could be that that poll pushes up the margins, but for me, 1% is in the lean column already, especially if you're like almost nearing 1.5%. So that is currently in the lean column for this election prediction according to the polls. So that was the state of Texas, and now we're going to move on to the very crucial state of Virginia. So for the Democrats, this is a very crucial state, and there's no reason why they should be losing here. And essentially, the latest polling data shows just that. Joe Biden is leading by a very substantial margin in the state of Virginia. I mean, margins that, for example, Obama only won it by 3 points, and Hillary Clinton only won it by 5. Joe Biden is not only doing like a little bit more than Clinton, he's doubling Hillary Clinton's lead. Right now in the polls, he's leading by 11.5%, which is enough to make it in our likely margin. So we're going to put that in the likely margin, and similar to the state of Colorado, New Mexico, and Virginia. Although this might not be my prediction, some of the calls I think I'm agreeing with, some I would disagree with. And if you want to see what I think and add all the resources and all my commentary on the 2020 presidential election prediction, stay tuned because I'll be posting one later today. So, that was the state of Virginia, and now we're going to take a look at a state that has become somewhat important in this race, or actually a district, and it's Maine's 2nd Congressional District. So, this district has been a district that went for Trump in 2016, went for Obama both times he ran for president. And right now, what are we seeing right here? Joe Biden is leading by 3%. Last time I looked at polls in Maine's 2nd Congressional District, maybe 2 or 3 months ago, Trump was narrowly leading. Now, those things have changed now, and Biden is leading by 3. So the last 2 polls by Colby College and then Public Policy Polling, which is a partisan polling firm, +3, so the average stands at +3, which is enough, actually, to put Maine's 2nd Congressional District in the lean Biden column. So that was the Maine's 2nd Congressional District. Now let's take a look at the state of New Hampshire and why, it's this far into the Democratic column. So according to the latest polls by UNH, so University of New Hampshire, St. Anselm, and NBC News Marist, those polls show pretty similar, with Biden still gaining support there. We have our averages at 9.3% in the state of New Hampshire, and the latest polls have Biden +13, Biden +7, and Biden +8. That is enough to put it in our lean or likely column, actually, at this time, and that is a good movement for the Joe Biden campaign. This shows that they're able not only win states that they won in 2016, but expand on Hillary Clinton's lead. Does that affect everything else nationwide? Probably not, because, popular vote doesn't really matter. However, it gives a big movement and momentum to the Biden campaign. He's leading in almost 13 points in the state of New Hampshire, according to some polls, which is pretty good, I would say, considering how close it was in 2016. It was one of the closest states. The next state we're going to discuss is the state of Nevada. So this state was, it was not the closest state in 2016, but it was pretty close. It only went by 2.4%. In other words, a lean margin. So what are we seeing here? So, there's an Emerson poll that, so this poll is old. So, let's just take a look at, there's not really any, real polling data from recent days. So, the last poll that we had from the state of Nevada had Biden +8, considering how the COVID-19 effect has been going, because all these polls were before COVID-19. COVID-19 has been a huge impact to the Nevada economy, with a lot of different things, like, the tourism industry falling out, a lot of people moving out of the state of Nevada so they could go work somewhere else. All that stuff is going to affect the economy in Nevada. And at this point in time, that's only going to hurt Trump somewhat. So let's just suppose around 2 points. I would put it in the likely margin. And that doesn't look far off, considering that that for the most part, Biden was leading last time by around 8%, and maybe the poll have changed a lot. So that's something we must consider. But since we don't have confirmed polling data from the last 2 to 3 months that we actually have been living through the pandemic, we're going to add 2 or 3 points to the Democrats, just for COVID-19 effects. So that was the state of Nevada, and now let's take a look at the state of Iowa. So this is one of the states that the Republican Party has been banking on. This is one of the states that are crucial to a Trump victory. Trump doesn't win Iowa, it's not going to be the end of the day electorally, But I mean, that shows that he's not too much as a in the lead in other states. So right now, both polls have Trump ahead, whether it is Monmouth, Des Moines Register, Public Policy Polling, which is a Democratic firm, +2, +1, +2, average of 1.7. So that's enough to put Iowa in the lean column for the Republican Party. And just starting to look how this map is starting to look like, Iowa and Georgia are kind of in similar scenarios. We're going to Trump about 1.5%. They're areas where demographically have been Republican. All those different things are really helping the Republican Party. So something to watch, and we're probably going to see a lot of similarities between those two states when it comes to this election. So that was the state of Iowa, and now we will take a look at the state of Ohio. So pretty similar demographically to the state of Iowa. There's somewhat of a large African American population. There's a lot of establishment Republican voters and a lot of rural vote in the state of Ohio. Biden is leaning by 2.3% according to these polls. So that should be enough to put it in the lean column for the Biden campaign. Just looking at it, this shows that Biden is actually leading. Okay, so in the latest polls by CBS, +1 for Trump. A poll a week before that was Rasmussen, which is actually one of the Republicans' favorite polls, +4 for Joe Biden. And Ohio Media Collaborative has Biden headed by 4. So, I mean, it's looking, I would say, pretty good for the Democrats there. However, as we get closer to Election Day, things might narrow down. But all latest polls have been showing a trend for Biden, and a 2.4% lead is enough to put it in the lean margin. So that's that. Going on to the next state, which is the state of Minnesota. This is a state that realistically has pretty much no need for it to flip. I mean, just according to the data. Just looking at this data, I mean, a Trump flip is going to look very out of place. The polling averages have Biden +9, where the Trafalgar Group, so that's a Republican polling firm, Biden +5, which I mean, leaning by 5% is pretty good. And even when it's your opponents who are polling this, I mean, that's not a good look for them. And Fox News had a poll 5 days before, Biden +13, so Biden +9. So I would be comfortable putting this for the Democratic Party. They should be able to win here, I mean, unless something crazy happens. So that was the state of Minnesota. Let's take a look now at the state of Arizona. So this state has been realistically one of the more swing states of this election. We saw there was like a point where Donald Trump and Joe Biden were pretty much almost equal. Then what ended up happening is that they both shot up in the polls. And I just want to take a look at this. So when polling first started, we saw that, I mean, it wasn't that much. It was like January, I mean, the race was a lot tighter, less than 1%. Trump led for a couple of days. What did we notice? Well, COVID-19. COVID-19 started right here, and we saw how Biden shut up in the polls right before COVID-19. The pandemic hit, pretty much everything stayed the same for a couple weeks. Then the really bad handling effects started being felt these couple weeks right here, where we see Biden increasing in polls and Trump decreasing, and now we got him back to the recovery of the United States. Both candidates are actually gaining in the polls. So this is the first one we have a graph for. Biden is leading, generally speaking, by 3.7%, +2 in a CNBC change research. Then a CNN poll has +4 for Biden, NBC +5. So +3.7. That's enough to put it into the lean column at this time for the Democratic Party. That is somewhat good polling in the state of Arizona for them. Those are very good numbers, and it shows that they're not only making this race competitive, but they're actually leading. So after this, we're going to have the state of Michigan. So this is another state that has the graph, because there's a lot of polls from here. So right now, Biden's leading by 6.3%, with a Grievous poll showing Biden +9, a CBS poll showing Biden +6, a CNBC change research poll showing Biden +4. So I mean, right now, if you want to take a look at the graph, if this wants to go down a little bit, this shows us that, there you go. If this shows us that, I mean, Donald Trump has not been close to leading. The closest I think he ever was this point in the election, where he was losing by 5 points. Not such a good look for his campaign. And essentially, when it comes to like COVID-19, and we see what the effect was in the state of Michigan, I mean, it really didn't have that much an effect. I mean, Donald Trump just kept on going like normal, like he was. But I mean, it has Biden had +6.3 on average. So that's enough to put it in the likely column along with the state of Minnesota. So now we're gonna look at the state of our next state. So that was the state of So we're gonna take where Donald Trump was actually leading. Actually, not that long ago, during the pandemic, where we saw Trump go even lead at one point by even like 1%, which is a lot. So I mean, ever since, I mean, poll numbers for Trump have gone down a lot, and right now the current average has Trump, or actually Biden ahead by 4.6%, enough to put it in the lean column for Joe Biden. And honestly, this shows very good things again for the Democrats. If they're able to win some of these states by lean margins, that's pretty good for them. So, the state of North Carolina, Biden plus 4.6. Now, looking at the state of Pennsylvania, this is another state that has looked very similar to the state of Michigan. However, it's yet a little different. So, similar yet different. So, here we're seeing the race was a lot closer at some point, 2.3%, which is pretty good for the president. We saw that there was a point where, like, during the pandemic, everything started going downhill like it did in every state. He reached a point of where he was losing to Biden, actually, by a substantial margin. But ever since, I mean, polls have started to close up a little bit. I mean, latest poll has +2 and +3 for Biden. And there was a Franklin and Marshall poll, Biden +9. So they have their average at 4.7, which is enough to put it in the lean column at this point. So the state of Pennsylvania is currently in the lean column for the Democrats, according to the polling data that we do have at this time. One of our later states, one of our last, is the state of Florida. This is my home state. And right now, polling has Biden consistently ahead of 5, +3, +4. So those are CNBC polls, Mason-Dixon, and CNN. So the average stands at 4. So according to this, Biden is leading by around 4%, so that'd be enough to put it in the lean margin. So we already see that Biden already won the election and by a landslide at this point. So that was the state of Florida. I mean, those polls are pretty accurate, I would say. However, I mean, you don't see that much support on the ground. So when it comes to the last two states, going to be the state of Wisconsin. This has been one of the states in the Rust Belt that has truly been flip-flopping for a long time. I mean, there's actually just one flip-flop, but I mean, that's still considering a lot, considering how this election has been held. So, Wisconsin has Biden ahead +5.0 points. There was only one point where Trump was leading +1, and then everything else is Biden +8, Biden +8, and Biden +5. So that 5-point lead is enough to put the state of Wisconsin into the likely column. So I mean, this map looks a little weird, and I will explain why. And we're gonna go through our last state, which is the state of Alaska. I just wanted to mention this, cause I mean, essentially speaking, it's a state that kind of never gets talked about. This state is a lot more liberal than people may think. So I mean, according to the one poll we had last month, Donald Trump's only had by a lean margin. However, I don't think this is going to be the case. So I mean, if you listen to the polling, this is what's going to happen. And then the last thing is Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District. Last time I checked polls, on 5:30, I think Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District was leading for Biden by a lean margin. Unfortunately, Real Clear Politics does not have that. So that's what I'm just gonna fill in lean for the Democrats. So big trend that we're seeing here. Rust Belt pretty solid for the Democrats. I mean, right now we're looking at a pretty good scenario for Joe Biden. We've seen a lot of gains in the polls for him after the pandemic. And I mean, the election is only going to narrow down. Do I think the polls are completely biased? Do I think they're completely wrong? No, I think the polls do have error in them because nothing is perfect. They do have their margin of error. So if we take all these elections, they all fall in the margin of error except a couple of few ones. So polls, I think, in my opinion, are correct. Would this be my electoral map at this point? Probably not. I will make an update on the electoral map later today, so that's going to be something you guys want to stay tuned for. Also, today we have our Purple Projections podcast, and a great opportunity for you guys to see who is our large guest that we're going to have on this podcast. Very interesting thing to watch out for. So guys, hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please give it a huge thumbs up, like and subscribe, and turn on post notifications to get notified when I post my next video. Hope you enjoyed the video, and goodbye.